I'll go watch it, Sandra. It sounds interesting.
We're live now.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I'm Gwen Whistler, the chair of the Finance and Human Resources Committee, and I'd like to welcome you to our January 25th remote meeting. All council committee members and staff are participating virtually. We appreciate your patience as we continue to work through holding these committee meetings a bit differently. To help our audience follow along, I'll state each section of the agenda aloud. We are streaming live on our Virtual Engagement Hub, which is accessible through the Virtual Engagement Hub link on the front page of the city website. We also have an option for the public to listen by phone. For those of you out there with us today, welcome. For today's meeting, we have the option for people to call in and comment live during the meeting. To call in and comment live, use the same number, 855-925-2801. The meeting code is 5257. Your phone will be muted and you will hear the meeting live. At this point, speakers will need to push *3 to enter the speaker queue. I'll now go through and introduce the committee members and staff who are participating virtually. Please make sure to mute your microphone if you are not speaking. When you would like to speak, unmute your microphone. Please remember to mute your microphone after speaking. Council and staff, as I call your name, please say a quick hello. Councilwoman Kilgore.
Good afternoon.
Councilwoman Turner.
Good afternoon.
City Manager Deborah Campbell.
Good afternoon.
Interim Assistant City Manager Peggy Rowe.
Hello, everyone.
Finance Director Tony McDowell.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Assistant Finance Director Becky King.
Good afternoon.
Budget Manager Taylor Floyd.
Hello.
And Assistant Public Works Director Amy Deaton, I believe is correct.
That
right?
is correct. That is, yes,
Thank
that
you.
is correct. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Okay, so just to help the audience follow along, I'll state each section of the agenda and do a vocal roll call for each vote. If committee members, would like to talk, raise your hand and interrupt me if I don't see you. Just jump in. So the first item on the agenda is the approval of the minutes. Oh, Deborah's raised her hand.
Just quickly, Ms. Whistler, I should have said this earlier, but we do have another staff member, Rachel Woods, who is our Assistant City Manager, who has joined us. Rachel, if you want to come in and just say hello, that would be fantastic. No, that's my fault. That was totally my fault, and I apologize.
Didn't even focus in. Welcome. Your first day here.
It's second day, so nice to meet everybody. Thank you so much.
Great.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Thank you. I apologize. So the first item is the approval of the minutes. Do I have any questions or changes for the minutes? Then could I get a motion?
I'll move. This is Sage.
Great. Thank you. So I'll do a roll call. Councilwoman Kilgore? Councilwoman Turner?
Aye.
And I'm an aye. Okay, so the next item is the CFO update, and I'll go ahead and turn it over to the Finance Director, Tony McDowell. Take it away, Tony.
Thanks, Councilmember Whistler. Good afternoon, everyone. Tony McDowell, Finance Director. Just a couple quick items I wanted to cover this afternoon under the CFO update before we move into the rest of the agenda. And the first of those items is the upcoming schedule for this committee. You all are currently scheduled to meet in February, on February 22nd at 1 p.m. We already have, or we do have a budget work session with the full council scheduled for that afternoon, for later that afternoon. So we're going to propose that you all cancel that meeting of this committee on February 22nd. The next meeting after that would be on March 22nd, also at 1 p.m. We would like to hold that meeting. At that meeting, we anticipate staff bringing forward the fiscal year 23 fee proposals from departments. And as you all know, that's typically a meeting that has a fair amount of meat to it and takes a fair amount of time. And so we would like to hold that meeting on the 22nd, and then that would allow us to hopefully move forward with fee proposals to the full council in April. So those are the items that we're proposing, or the schedule we're proposing for the Finance Committee. After the March 22nd agenda, or the March 22nd meeting, we'll come back to you all with a possible meeting schedule for the rest of the spring at that point. So unless there's any questions on that, I'll move to the second item I was going to mention to you all, and that's just a brief staffing update in the finance department. I think you all may remember Doug Whitman, our treasurer. He presented to you all a few months ago and was a fairly frequent presenter to this committee over the last several years on both investments and debt. And Doug has left the city. His last day was a couple weeks ago. So I just want to make you all aware of that. And thank Doug for his service over the last few years in the public meeting, because he really did a great job with us, helping the city manage its investments and the debt as well. In the meantime, Assistant Finance Director Becky King and I will be handling Doug's responsibilities. We're taking a look at the structure in our accounting division, and we're going to be moving quickly to fill both his vacancy and other vacancies in that area as well. So just want to make the committee aware of that staffing update. So with that, that's all I have. If you all have any questions or any other items you would like to ask about, happy to answer any questions you might have.
Does the committee have any questions or? Okay. So thank you, Tony. I appreciate it. And please, if you're in touch with Doug, let him know that we really did appreciate his service. I thought he brought a level of professionalness and you know, helped us understand some pretty complex financing issues. And so we really appreciate his work.
I will. Thank you.
Thanks. So our next item is the stormwater mid-review. And so Taylor, I think you're gonna take this one or start it out, right?
Yeah, thank you. Again, good afternoon, council members. Hopefully we'll get the presentation pulled up here in a minute. Should look pretty similar to what you saw in October with sanitation services. This time it'll be me again, Taylor Floyd, budget manager from the Finance and Management Services Department. And I'll be joined heavily, I will say, by Amy Deaton, our Assistant Director in the Public Works Department. Next slide. So what we're planning to cover is, essentially just kind of do a review of what the stormwater services really entail. We're going to identify some challenges to service delivery and achieving our goals, and then discuss some opportunities we have to address those challenges. Next slides. So hopefully at the end of this presentation, a few things, we hope that you kind of take away, first and foremost, that managing stormwater is really complex. It involves infrastructure, hard infrastructure like pipes and culverts, green infrastructure like rain gardens and bioswales, and trying to mitigate the impacts of flooding, and trying to improve water quality. So there's a lot that goes into this service. Also, our system has some pretty significant maintenance and capacity issues. We have some deferred maintenance needs. We have a lot of infrastructure that's at end of life, and that's really created some significant challenges for us. And to address those challenges, we really need some additional funding. We're going to really struggle to meet the goals that we've set for the system and improve the system without that. And we will be bringing a fee increase for your consideration later in the budget process. So I think one more thing, just a reminder why we're here. Last year during the budget process, we did not make any recommended changes to stormwater or sanitation fees, but we did say that we were going to do a mid-year review of those services. So here we are today, again, with stormwater. I think with that.
Taylor?
Yes.
Thank you for this. Just when you do bring that forward, can you just remember to include, for information purposes, what the fee adjustments that citizens have been experiencing relative to MSD, to the sewerage district, because I sit on that board, and they adopt kind of an idea of you know, small fee increases, but pretty much every year, with an idea that, you know, they're trying to continuously fund. Their structure is a little bit different than ours, but they're continuously funding their debt and, you know, just kind of keeping up with the system. And I would like council to consider looking at their structure, how they do that, and kind of think about that relative to stormwater, and really even water delivery, because I think they deal with a lot of the same issues that we deal with, in the sense that these are large infrastructure investments, and if we continue to just kick the can down the road and we don't ask for fee increases, then you kind of shock the populace with, or you have to, you know, you kind of get forced into shocking people into large increases. And I think if we considered sort of gradual increases similar to what MSD does, it might be a little easier on our residents.
Thank you for that comment, Councilmember Whistler. I think that's certainly kind of the over the longer term, recent past, maybe a little less so, but what we've done in stormwater and I think what we've tried to do in water as well. So I think that certainly makes a lot of sense, and we will certainly look at that as we work towards that proposal in a few months. So I think we can move on to the next slide. And I think I'm going to hand it over to Amy to talk a little bit about the services.
Okay, if we can go to the next slide. Just some background as to what stormwater really is. Stormwater is water that originates from precipitation. So when it rains or snows, a stormwater system of inlets, storm drains, pipes, and ditches carries stormwater runoff to local ponds, creeks, or streams. And these water systems include built and natural environments. Natural environments allow more of the runoff to infiltrate into the ground. As natural environments are developed, the amount and rate of stormwater increases, sometimes beyond the capacity of the built system and receiving streams. The stormwater runoff that does not soak into the ground can pick up pollutants like trash, chemicals, oils, and sediment that can harm our rivers and streams. To manage stormwater runoff, we need to manage the built environment. And this includes things like installing, replacing, or repairing pipes, culverts, storm drain inlets, installing storage facilities for stormwater runoff, green infrastructure to reduce the pollutants in stormwater, and creating ordinance requirements for developments. This is all done in an effort to reduce flooding throughout the city and improve water quality. Next slide. Asheville has a very old system, and we have found systems that are over 100 years old. And a lot of what was used back then or during that time is terracotta pipe. Later on, corrugated metal pipe and concrete pipe was used. Most of these materials have reached their useful lifespan, and these systems are starting to show signs of deterioration or active failure. And this is what causes most of our sinkholes in the area. We have about 40 miles of pipe systems to maintain that we know of. I do also want to note that we only maintain what is within our right-of-way and on city property. We do not work on private property. We have roughly 412 roadside miles of ditches to maintain. We have 22 green infrastructure facilities throughout the city. And green infrastructure are practices that capture and filter and reduce stormwater. And by doing so, it helps cut down on the amount of nuisance flooding and reduces the polluted runoff that reaches our waters. Green infrastructure uses natural elements such as soil and plants to turn rainfall into a resource instead of a waste. We have about 7 stormwater capital projects that we are working on this fiscal year. and we have a little under 29,000 active customer accounts. Next slide. Much of what we do to manage our stormwater is driven by a federally mandated stormwater program under the Clean Water Act. This program is administered by the state. The program is an effort to protect and improve the water resources from polluted stormwater that discharges from stormwater systems. The permit requires a 5-year stormwater management plan that identifies specific measures the city will perform in order to comply with the permit. It is an unfunded mandate with no federal or state resources provided to local governments to implement these measures. The state does require local governments to adequately fund their stormwater program. Next slide. So how do we fund our stormwater program? We charge a stormwater utility fee, which generates the Stormwater Enterprise Fund. By charging a fee, we are able to spread the cost of this public service based on each property's contribution to stormwater runoff. All properties with impervious surfaces are charged a fee. That fee is based on the square footage of the impervious surface. Impervious surfaces are hard areas that do not allow water to seep into the ground. Instead, the water runs off the impervious surface and then flows into a storm drain or a nearby body of water. Properties with more impervious surface create more runoff and generally have a larger impact on water quality and quantity. Single-family residential properties have a tiered rate structure based on the amount of impervious surface, so that properties with the least amount of impervious surface area pay the lowest stormwater fee. Non-single-family properties are literally everything else. We're talking multifamily, duplexes, commercial development, schools, churches. They are all charged based on an equivalent rate unit, or ERU, where one ERU equates to about 2,400 square feet of impervious surface. Most everyone is billed a fee with their bi-monthly water bill. The city also pays a stormwater fee for its own impervious surfaces on city-owned property. The benefits of managing stormwater are realized for the entire community, the entire city. Stormwater does not have boundaries. It does not see property lines or city jurisdictions. What we do in Asheville benefits others downstream. We're going to talk a little bit more in detail about stormwater fees a little later in the presentation.
Amy, This is Gwen. I'm just going to interrupt you for a second. Does this stormwater fee apply to water customers outside the city limits?
No, this is only for city residents, people inside the city. Our permit is based on the city jurisdiction.
So folks who are receiving city water but are outside the city limits, someone charges them a stormwater fee or not?
It depends on if that local government has decided to implement a fee. Just for example, some counties don't charge a fee. They pay that with their general fund. So it just depends on each local government's what they've decided to do, how to fund their program.
Okay. Sage, you have your hands raised?
I do. I'm just curious. I mean, the numbers, the 28 or 29,000 customers, don't we have about 45,000 structures in the city? How does that work?
Yes, those are active accounts. I was wondering if this question would come up. Those are actual active accounts. So some accounts aren't currently active because they're vacant. And we do our best to try to, recoup or find out who owns it, how to get that. But that is actually based on the active, an active account.
And might some of those be like a master meter of 300 apartments or something? Or
Could
is
be,
that
yes.
Interesting. Okay, thanks.
Okay, Amy, sorry to interrupt you. You can keep
No,
going.
no, that's fine. That's fine. I think, we're on to the next slide. We're going to get into our stormwater programs next. So there's a lot of how there's a lot that we do to manage stormwater. And so we have tried to divide up the work into 3 different categories: the system, flood reduction, and water quality. The storm drain system includes inlets, storm drains, pipes, culverts, and ditches. We've already talked about that. And to maintain the system, the Stormwater Division installs or constructs new infrastructure or repairs existing infrastructure, either with in-house crews or as part of a stormwater capital improvement project. Maintenance also includes reestablishing ditches when they get filled with sediment and cleaning out clogged pipes with our vacuum trucks. Stormwater has its own capital team, and it is responsible for the development of stormwater capital projects from planning to design through construction, including inspections. The Stormwater Division also works very closely with staff in the Development Services Department in assisting with private development plan review, permitting, and inspections there. The bottom graph on this slide, I hope you can see all of those utilities. This illustrates the complex layout of utility lines below our streets in an urban setting. So when we discuss the need for stormwater infrastructure to navigate around other utilities, those other utilities include water, sanitary, sewer, telephone, electric, and gas lines. Stormwater is its own separate utility that is competing for space under our roads. The design of a stormwater system is based on gravity, so you are limited in where it can be placed. The deeper the system has to be placed, the more expensive it is, more costly the project is. Also, we don't always know what the exact location of the other utilities is underground until we actually start digging. This graphic is actually the best case scenario. Other utility lines are often overlapping in the same trench or perpendicular to where we need to place the stormwater system, which adds to the complexity of the system in general. The goal of performing all this work is to have a well-maintained system that functions to carry stormwater runoff from the surface. Next slide. Flood risk reduction means mitigating effects of flooding at different levels, but not eliminating floods altogether. Nuisance flooding refers to things such as water standing in the street for a long period of time, or runoff from the road that gets into property owners' yards. It can also be runoff coming from other private properties or developments. And this is where most of our drainage complaints come from. As we receive those complaints, we investigate to determine if there's anything we can do or if it's a private property matter. Ahead of storm events, our crews will be out cleaning storm drains to make sure the runoff can get into our system and off the roads. We also provide emergency response during flooding events and help the Streets Division with snow and ice removal that we just did a week ago. The floodplain management programs that we participate in require development and system standards. These programs help property owners receive better flood insurance and lower their premium rates. Next slide. We perform a number of activities that also help improve water quality. Street sweeping helps prevent harmful chemicals from entering our waterways, but it also helps keep debris from blocking our inlets and getting into our storm drain systems. For public education and involvement, we distribute educational materials to the community. We perform outreach activities with the community to talk about the impacts of stormwater discharges, and we educate the public about steps they can take to reduce pollutants. We also implement pollution prevention measures in our own municipal operations. We address illicit discharges to our system that get reported. Development Services manages and enforces our erosion control program to keep sediment from traveling off construction sites and into our waterways. Everything the Stormwater Division does is interconnected and helps to maintain our overall system, reduce flooding, and improve water quality. Next slide. Did y'all have any questions? I think that's you, Taylor.
All right, can go on to the next one. So a little bit of history on the Stormwater Fund. In the early 1990s, the General Assembly passed legislation that allowed local governments to assess fees that could be used to construct and maintain stormwater systems. Asheville's Stormwater Fund was established in 2005. And enterprise fund means, it's supported by the revenues generated from the users of the system. The goals of that at the time were to, as it stated, ensure public safety and welfare, fund capital projects, and comply with that federal permit and the Clean Water Act. In 2013 was the wettest year on record in Asheville at the time, and resulted in some significant flooding and landslides. And we actually saw public support for increased stormwater maintenance activities and capital investment, and a fee increase to go along with that. So as part of that, a fee increase in FY15 helped to fund those services and established a plan to raise rates by 5% annually. Also developed a 10-year capital improvement program and added some additional staffing to help support some of those maintenance activities. Next slide. So kind of looking at how the fee has changed over time, one thing I want to note, there's a gap between 2005-06 and 2011-12. That's purposeful. So just to make sure that everyone saw that. The fee stayed at $2.34 for all properties for a very long time. That increase in FY15, we split the fee out based on the amount of impervious surface. As Amy was talking about earlier, we'll give a little bit more detail about how that gets split. And then you can see from there that incremental 5% increase per year. And that generates around $300,000 in additional revenue annually, those 5% fee increases. You can also see it kind of levels off over the last few years. We did not raise fees in FY20 or 21, primarily to ease the financial burden on our community during the pandemic. But that also represents some lost opportunity to maintain and expand our service without that additional $300,000. Next slide. So kind of a broad overview of the Stormwater Fund budget. Personnel is a bit over half. As with most of our city services, we rely on staff to help us provide the service. And in the case of stormwater, that's primarily folks that are dedicated to maintaining that existing infrastructure. Operating at about 35% is primarily, again, related to that maintenance, and that's the actual materials, the stuff that those folks are putting into the ground, replacing parts of our system and repairing parts of the system. And then capital and debt, a relatively low contribution that funds capital projects, existing debt service, and the purchase of equipment, and that's about 8.6% of the total. So next slide. Again, most of the staff in those top two categories are dedicated to maintaining the system. We've added staff over time to try to address some of our deferred maintenance challenges. We also have, as Amy mentioned, staff that do development review and inspection. The Stormwater has its own capital program, staff dedicated to that, and some administrative support. And just to note, there is a high demand for the people that can do this type of work. The salary increases from the compensation study implementation have helped to address some of the challenges there, but it's a struggle to stay competitive in a rapidly changing market for employees. Next slide. So a little bit of history on the capital side. This chart is the capital contribution from the Stormwater Operating Fund over time. And in general, you can see that, again, as those incremental fee increases were happening, we were increasing that capital contribution, but that's dropped off over the last few years. Part of that is due to some material and labor operating costs that we're seeing. Just again, good thing we were able to implement the compensation study, but additional costs there. And then also just material costs to maintain the existing system. And really what this means for us is, it's really limiting our ability to complete some of those larger scale projects that maintain and improve the system. Next slide. All right, so what folks are actually paying Again, the stormwater is an enterprise fund, so it's completely funded through user charges, not property or sales tax. The fee is based on the impervious service area, like Amy mentioned. So essentially, the more impervious service you have, the higher your fee is per month. And again, you can see there that non-single family properties at the bottom includes multifamily, just to, again, make sure that folks are aware. And next slide, if you kind of look at how these fees, what share of the revenues they generate, this is a snapshot from December of last year. First thing is at the bottom there, that $6.1 million. Again, the utility fee is an overwhelming majority of the total revenues in the fund, which are total fund budget's about 6.7 million. And you can also see an overwhelming majority of that comes from those non-single family ratepayers. And most residential users are in that tier 2 category. So they're paying about $60 a year for stormwater service. Next slide. I'm going to hand it back off to Amy to talk more about the services.
Next slide, please. Because of the age of our infrastructure that we talked about earlier and the deferred maintenance in previous years, it is difficult to keep up with needed repairs. The lack of resources also makes it more challenging to be proactive. Instead, we are in a reactive mode to address immediate or emergency needs, such as sinkholes. Because of funding shortages, we sometimes have to push stormwater capital projects further out, which can result in higher cost and have limited capacity, and that creates limited capacity to incorporate stormwater infrastructure into other capital projects. This also results in fewer opportunities to improve the current service level and achieve the stated goals in the comprehensive plan and the climate resilience assessment. This brings us back to, again, having to defer maintenance, which only becomes more expensive to replace. Next slide. This shows the average cost increase of some of the materials we have used in 2018 versus 2021. In the past, we have also faced fewer contractors that can do this work, also leading to increases in contract labor costs. And while this table shows increased contract costs, we are also seeing significant increases in material costs for in-house work. And while we think the increases from this past year are likely due to supply chain issues, the steady increase is likely to continue into the near future. The fee increases of 5% annually that we had been initiating are not enough to keep up with just inflation. And we'll see if these cost increases continue or if the costs become more stable once supplies become more available. Next slide. In an earlier slide, we talked about having to weave stormwater systems around other utilities under the road. In general, stormwater design and construction is complex and expensive. There is a lot of planning and calculations involved, and in construction, you might have to excavate rock that you didn't know was there, or you might have to change your design because of utility conflict. Stormwater design and construction, it just takes a lot of time and effort. And depending on the number of projects we have going on, it can also limit staff's capacity to manage projects. The cost of obtaining easements I'm sorry, let me go back. When I say staff's capacity, that's the more projects we have, we also need to consider the fact that we may need more staff as well. The cost of obtaining easements or right-of-way is going up. Permits may take longer to obtain, which can also delay a project. Now, as we mentioned in the previous slide, contractor timelines and cost and the effects of the pandemic have had an impact on the price of projects. We have also recently taken on maintenance of stormwater in parks and other city property. And while some of this work can be done in-house, we are not able to contribute financially to other city capital projects. Next slide. We are not able to keep up with just the overall growth of our city for many of the same reasons that we've already talked about. Infill development also adds to our challenges. We've talked again, navigating around utilities. Utility location is another mandated program that requires stormwater to locate our system prior to another entity digging. This is necessary to protect our infrastructure from costly damage. We currently have one utility locator and are considering the need for an additional utility locator to be able to keep up with the number of locate requests that we receive. Next slide. As you can see from this graph, flooding frequencies have increased. Climate change will only make flooding events more frequent and more significant. This will cause our stormwater system as a whole to be overextended in its capacity as flooding events get worse. Our mountainous terrain poses issues as well due to stormwater running downhill rather than being captured in flatter ground. And I mentioned green infrastructure earlier on. There is a need to incorporate more of it across the city to help with climate change. But this means that we will need to purchase more right-of-way or land to install those facilities. More watershed studies are needed, along with water quality testing and sampling. But this will result in more capital projects and more in-house construction to be performed, which may necessitate more resources. Next slide. And next slide. Despite all of these challenges, we are trying to be proactive where we can. We implemented a program that replaces pipes ahead of the streets resurfacing program. We also collaborate with other utilities during this process so that we can work through any conflicts. And once the road is resurfaced, we should not have to cut open and then patch it back again for some time. This hopefully makes the most use out of ratepayers and taxpayer dollars. The Stormwater Division provides support to other departments on stormwater needs in their projects. The camera crew allows us to be proactive by investigating the conditions of our pipe systems to see where failures could occur before they actually happen. We were fortunate this year to receive funding in the state budget for our Sulphur Springs project that is under construction right now. We are also working to get a consultant on board to assess our current program structure and fees, our level of service, and to help develop a multi-year financial plan similar to what the water department has. Some of you may have been contacted by members of the Stormwater Task Force. We have been communicating with them and they are supportive of the study and a fee increase. But even with these improvements, we still have shortfalls. And without added revenue, we are really doing less with the same amount of money. Next slide.
All right, so to wrap up, coming back to these key takeaways, again, stormwater is a complex service. I think that, you know, the information that we presented hopefully reflected that. We have significant maintenance and capacity needs in the system from deferred maintenance, and we need additional funding to address those needs, meet service expectations, and achieve our stated goals. Next slide. So where do we go from here? As I think Tony mentioned earlier, we will be recommending changes to fees and charges to this committee at your March meeting. And we will be working to develop a recommendation for a stormwater fee increase that will be included at that time. I think that's the end of our presentation. Councilwoman Kilgore.
Sandra? You're not. Okay.
Yes, I just wanted to ask a question. I'm a little confused because early on, basically, I think Amy said something about that we weren't getting federal and state revenue for the stormwater, but yet here on what you're saying on Sulphur Springs, the state actually gave us money towards that. So I'm a little confused as how that works.
The federal or state do not fund our actual stormwater program. What we do to comply with our stormwater permit. The money that we received for Sulphur Springs was like it was a one-time deal. It was it was specific funds set out for a specific project in the state budget. But I mean that does not typically happen. that is a first for me. So, so yeah, they don't fund the actual program, but I think in year-to-year budgets, it's kind of like a grant. If you go out for a grant project and receive funding through that grant, it's kind of the same, that same process.
Okay, and one other question, with the Biden infrastructure plan that's out there, do you know if they will be able to use some of that money to improve the system?
I'm
With
sorry.
Okay,
Can you
it's going,
repeat that?
yeah. In light of the Biden infrastructure plan, will we be able to use some of those funds to actually improve the system?
Hopefully so. We have conversations with finance department on that. Not sure what that's going to entail right now. And I do think that it is a longer period of time. It's not just a shot of money all at once. It's kind of a gradual over like a 10-year period. Finance department may have more on that, but yeah, I'm hopeful that we can use some of that to do some of our larger capital projects.
Yeah, the only reason I was concerned, because if they're not doing anything now, then maybe they may have restrictions on what we can do. Another thing, are we as a city utilizing all of our resources as far as getting fees from other areas that we could maybe help fund the stormwater? Like maybe, like since it's local, then cities have sort of set where the fees will come from, or what, are we utilizing all of those services? Like, have you been to other cities that may be charging XYZ for contractors for this or XYZ, different fees that can actually increase our funding to improve the system? Are we utilizing all of these resources, or do you know?
As far as I'm aware of, Tony, can you add?
No, I mean, I would just say I agree with you, Amy. I think we are utilizing all the resources that we have available to us. I think, as you all know, here in North Carolina, local governments are creatures of the state. And so
yes,
unless we are specifically provided with authorization for certain fees, it's really tough for us to.
Well, see, that's the reason I was wondering, because as far as impact fees for different things that you still, but even though they're not giving you anything for it, they're still limiting what you can charge for different things. Okay.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Sage?
Thank you. And I'll add to it. I was also curious about the Biden infrastructure bill. Maybe that's something we could, when we talk about this in March, if there's any updates that could be added to our agenda that time. I'm wondering, so there was a mention of infill and infill projects costing us some stormwater. I'm just kind of curious, generally speaking, we point to infill as a solution as opposed to sprawl. So is there any more you could share? Is that infill of multifamily, infill of single family? Is it just dilapidation of historic pipes, and when a project touches a new connection, there's a problem?
Well, I think it's just infill. It's just development in general, with infill being one of those types of developments we've allowed. Anytime you allow more impervious surface, it's going to increase your stormwater volume levels, which impacts the stormwater system itself. So that it's just a general overall infill, development, more impervious surface impacts your system.
Gotcha.
And it just makes it more challenging as to what we can do.
Okay. And I'm also wondering then if there is an opportunity for an application to the TPDF fund for this kind of stuff. If that's something that city staff, have on the list of things to apply in the future or anything.
I'll jump in on that one. I think that's an interesting question. I off the cuff would say that we might struggle to connect that to heads in beds, because I think that's kind of the primary driver for them. But certainly something that we can consider. I think it's more likely to be where we may have opportunities to get money for projects that involve a lot of pieces: stormwater, road, pedestrian, placemaking, et cetera, that we may be able to do something along those lines. But I think just sort of the basic system maintenance, which I think is kind of our primary concern at the moment, I think we would be challenged just in the same way that I think we'd be challenged to get street resurfacing money in general from that fund.
Interesting. Okay. I'm thinking that the hotels and their water and stormwater and full sites, are pretty, maybe after the open space rules change a little, it'll be impacted, but it seems like they're filling in whole sites, like leaving zero pervious surface. So maybe something to think about in the future. I'm always thinking of ways we can get some of that money for infrastructure that we know they are impacting.
Yeah, and two quick things on that, and also on Councilwoman Kilgore's questions. One is I do want to mention that stormwater is also an eligible use for American Rescue Plan funds. Just to put that out there, and that I think one of the things that we'll have the opportunity with the consultant that we're going to try to get on board in the next few months is to look at our current charges and the structure of them, and make assessments and maybe make some recommendations to make adjustments, not just to the fees themselves, but the structure overall. So that's one of the benefits of having somebody that can come look at what other folks are doing and maybe say, hey, you all should consider this. It might be a better way, or more sustainable way to fund your system.
Thank you. I'm thinking about the ARPA. I'm going through the document and reading all the applications, but I know I saw several from the city, but I don't recall one for stormwater. Have I just not seen it yet? Or is there one? There isn't one. Okay. Okay. I think that's all I have right now.
Deborah?
Yes, thank you, Ms. Whistler. I wanted to go back to, I think, what Sandra was asking about, are we looking at other ways to charge fees and so forth? And as you know, with user fees and so impact fees, there has to be this direct correlation between, the creation of that impact and the fee that's being charged. So it's really, really hard for these types of infrastructure, types of projects to create other types of, related fees, because it's just, legally we have to make that direct connection and correlation. But I think Taylor talked about, but we are looking at other communities to see if that by chance there is another way to assess the fees that may create additional revenue based on the user's use. So it's something that we just need more study, more information, more analysis, and a longer term plan to look at how we actually fund this extremely important infrastructure in our community. And we know that there is, as has been demonstrated through this presentation, there's tremendous need. And unfortunately, there's been a lot of deferred maintenance. And as Ms. Whistler said earlier, we can't catch up in a year or two. This is a long-term, game for us. But we are here today to say, we got to start. We got to start now. We got to start now trying to develop the financial wherewithal, the political will to say this is something that is a priority for our community, and that we need to kind of get back to the basics of just providing and upgrading our general, infrastructure that has unfortunately been deferred for many years with 100-year-old pipes. I mean, that's not that rare in North Carolina, but it is something that for Asheville is becoming a fairly significant health and safety risk for our community.
Yes.
So-
Go ahead.
Just real quick, I'm the Stacy liaison, and there's a woman, Ann Keller, who is on that board and also the chair of Riverlink. And she has been bringing to my attention that the Stormwater Task Force that she sat on has some kind of summary and stuff. I wonder if I know that there's a lot of demand. I haven't seen the report, but I understand that it says we need to do a lot more. And I wonder if that's something we could also review as we go through this, or hear more from that task force.
Sandra, did you have you're muted, Sandra.
The only thing I was going to say, because, being in real estate and really seeing a lot of these issues that are serious, especially here, and because of our challenging topography and different things, it's really, like she said, it's almost like a perfect storm unless we get started with this, because once it starts, just like, we have to do something. And so I'm glad to see we're being proactive, and we need to get the money to improve this, especially with all the growth that's going on here and the demand on the system is growing. So that's all I was going to say. Thank you.
Thank you. So we're all acutely aware of the big old sinkhole on Mumford Avenue. Is there anything we're doing with our residents is there something proactive that people that own property can look at their system, look at their privately owned system and, evaluate whether it's going to create a big sinkhole down the road? And if there is a way to do that, are we communicating that out into the community? Because I think there's confusion about, where our work starts and where private property, and also, people kind of don't understand that, there's a lot of stuff going on underneath their houses that they're responsible for, and you got to be proactive rather than just letting your house sink.
We do sometimes provide that in like the educational materials that we send out. Of course, we have some of the system is mapped on GIS. And so property owners can go there and look. It's not always accurate. It's not always right. And just, of course, when you purchase any property, you want to get a good survey, and you want to make sure, that surveyor is locating those pipes online. But we don't provide a service on those private properties as far as like inspections of the system that's on private property. They would have to obtain someone that could camera the line for them in order to really get down in there and see the condition of the pipe.
Okay. So Sage, did you say that you're the liaison for the Stormwater Task Force?
No, I think the Stormwater Task Force was an ad hoc task force that has since completed its mission.
Okay.
Stacy, which might be the next closest.
Okay. It just may be something that we talk to some of our advisory boards on, and that could be a task that we would ask them to, help or develop like a communication plan with privately owned properties so that we can avoid, or as much as you can, avoid the kind of things that happened at that Montford sinkhole. Because, even though I'm sure the city's infrastructure isn't the greatest there, we didn't cause that sinkhole. And their sinkhole probably deteriorated our system. So I'm just, kind of throwing that out there because it's for good and for bad, both a private and a public issue. And we know that a lot of our housing stock is old. Okay.
Well, if there's something we would like Stacy to do, just let me know. I'm happy to convey that.
Yeah, I guess I would ask you to, see if they wanted to pick up something like that, but don't add work to the staff's plate. Has to be a Stacy issue.
So 3 more staff people in the meetings.
Yeah, right. Yeah. None of that. Do we have any other questions or comments? Okay, Amy and Taylor, that was a great presentation. Really appreciate it and look forward to hearing from you again in March.
Thank you.
Thanks.
So the next item on our agenda is public comment. We did not receive any public comments before the meeting, but I'll open it up for live public comments. Are there any callers in the speaker queue for live comments?
No, there aren't.
Oh, so Sandra, not quite the same as your previous meeting. All right. So maybe you could take a little break before council. All right. All right. Well, so with that, I will go ahead and unless Deborah, you have an objection to canceling the February meeting, we will go ahead and agree to that we'll cancel the February meeting and look forward to getting back together in March.
No objection at all. Thank you.
Okay, great. All right. So with that, I'll adjourn the meeting. See you tonight.
Thank you, everyone.